All right, everybody, welcome to the inaugural episode of The Grappler's Dilemma. My name's Cody.
My name's Aaron.
We are friends, training partners, rivals.
Friendly rivals.
And most importantly, brothers in Christ.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we both hold the rank of purple belt. Now, you might ask, well, why should we listen to you guys? I will say neither of us are world-class grapplers. We are both serious hobbyists, I would say. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, and honestly, I think once you hit purple belt, it's like obligatory. You have to start a podcast or some type of athlete's Instagram.
And skip warm-ups.
Yeah, apparently.
But yeah, I mean, we both love talking about jiu-jitsu and figured why not record it.
So,
and I'll say this too: we are co-suffering with you people out there listening who are walking along the rocky, uphill, but also joyful road of jiu-jitsu. So,
I think it's a good description.
So we've decided to title...
Also the rocky uphill battle of listening to our first 10 episodes as we work out the kinks of the podcast,
yeah,
I think.
Amen.
Yeah, thank you for sticking around and listening. We're doing our best.
But yeah, we've decided to title our first episode Why We Train. And so I'll pose this question to you first, Aaron. So, admittedly, we've chosen a pretty strange hobby to dedicate hours and hours of our lives to, often at the expense of our physical health and personal relationships. And, let's just say you're talking to somebody and they have no idea what jiu-jitsu is, and maybe you explain it to them, or maybe they come and watch an open mat, and they're just like, why do you guys do this? What would be your answer?
That's kind of a question. And to preface this, we knew going into recording this episode that this was kind of going to be the topic of discussion. It would depend on who I was talking to, obviously, right? It depends on like the nature of the conversation. Because when I was thinking about how I would answer that question today, it kind of came down. This is going to sound so corny, but this is as genuine as I could possibly be. The thing that got me into jiu-jitsu was this sense of duty that I needed to be able to handle myself in some type of violent encounter. With that said, that's not necessarily the reason I continue to train.
Right. Right. You started out because you wanted to be able to fight, and now you want to
do barambolos,
wrist lock.
Yeah, I want to embarrass people. Yeah, and mother's milk people into sheer embarrassment. But no, like it does change over time. So the person that got me into jiu-jitsu was a guy named Courtney Muse. It was a guy that I used to work at the police department with, and at the time I was like really big into weightlifting, and I thought that was enough, right? It's like, well, who cares? I'm bigger and stronger than this. Like some grappling or some martial arts, who cares? I'm bigger, I'm stronger than this person. And then he took me up to like the training room, and he made me throw up. Like, got on top of me in side control, and he was kind of like my older brother. Like, taught me how to be a good cop and good patrol stuff. But he made me feel so helpless that I realized I had been walking around with this unearned sense of security just because I was into weightlifting. And then just by the nature of the job, I kind of realized, okay, I really need to start getting into this.
So job being law enforcement.
Yeah, the job being law enforcement. Yeah, like the street cop kind of stuff. But that kind of extended into like I was already a father and a husband, and it was like, oh, I'm also failing my family in this regard. And I know that you can kind of take that sentiment too far sometimes, but you should at least have a certain. Someone had characterized it like when the day comes and you have to, um, you have to defend your family in some kind of altercation. Are they going to see their dad or their husband be successful in that encounter, or are they going to see the man that they lean on for security, like
pull guard
and fall, yeah, and just fall apart, right? Not know, just be completely helpless,
right.
and so.
There's nothing wrong with pulling guard, by the way.
Yeah. Although I don't know, man. Like my purple belt journey right now is like I really just want to learn takedowns because I'm so sick of that meme of guard pulling.
Yeah.
That memes definitely can change minds.
That'll
man.
be another episode.
Yeah, that's for certain. That's for certain. But no, I think there is this. So that's where it all started, and I think but the thing that keeps me coming back, ultimately, right? The thing that got it started is this sense of like, okay, I need to know how to defend myself, and I want to be able to conduct myself in my profession at the time, confidently, and know that I could handle whatever situation kind of like put itself in front of me. But the reason I continue to do it now, it's kind of like the camaraderie and family side of it. It feels like being part of this team, right? There is this familial aspect to martial arts in general, but jiu-jitsu, anyone who trains can attest to it, and it's kind of almost cliche at this point to say that like jiu-jitsu kind of changes people's lives. And yeah, or maybe I'm just addicted to it. Like it's kind of hard for me to pinpoint. I don't know, like how about you? Like how did you even get into jiu-jitsu? I don't know if I've heard this story entirely.
It's kind of a weird story. I got into martial arts because basically after being like the victim of an assault.
Okay.
And I don't know, the details of that aren't super important. Like it wasn't the most traumatic thing ever, but basically I kind of got jumped, and then I I pulled a knife on like a group of teenagers that jumped me when I was living in Cleveland at the time, and they all ran off, but one of them had sucker punched me and opened up a big cut in my forehead, and I had to go to the ER and get stitches.
Dude, that's pretty gnarly.
Yeah.
You said it's not the most traumatic thing. That's
no,
it
could have been a lot worse.
Sure, but it could have been better.
So I don't know. That just like made me realize like that how vulnerable that I could be.
How old were you?
In my mid-20s.
Okay.
But basically I went down like a lot of things in my life, I went down on sort of all the wrong paths at first.
Okay.
So
well, we're okay. That'd be fun to get into. Let's go.
Well, basically just like a lot of traditional martial arts. We both have a sort of soft spot, I think, for a lot of traditional martial arts stuff.
Oh, I own a copy of the Bubishi Karate Bible.
Yeah, and that would be another great episode, sort of like trying to redeem traditional martial arts. Sure. But like Kung Fu and Tai Chi, and then
oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and then later on, in fact, I used to be able to do the whole 24 form Tai Chi, which is like a standard sort of like scripted.
I did not know this about you.
Yeah.
This is kind of interesting.
And then later on, I got into Aikido because I read
Steven Seagal's book.
No, the guy who invented Aikido, I can't remember his name.
Minnow. Oh, dude, I should know this.
I know.
It'll come.
I'm embarrassed that I forgot it too.
Yeah.
They call him O-sensei.
Yeah.
But so I did that for like 3 months, and I feel like my common sense was starting to tingle by that point.
How long? Wait, how long did you do Aikido?
3 months.
Okay.
And this is probably about 2015, I think. 2016 maybe. And one thing that bothered me was I never left there having broken a sweat. And that's sort of seemed wrong to me. I mean, even when I was doing Tai Chi, like it didn't break a sweat, but it was like I had to really concentrate to like make sure I was doing everything right, so it felt difficult.
Okay.
And there's probably an element of that in Aikido too, but
Sure.
And another, I have this memory too. The Aikido instructor, he said, I don't know if you guys have ever watched UFC. And I was like, no, not really. And he was like, well, like one of the things they do is they'll get behind somebody and strangle them. He's like, so because they don't want you to get behind them, they're going to do this. And that's when you counter with this. And I remember thinking to myself, like, well, it'd be nice if you taught us how to get behind people and strangle them.
Yeah. But what if they do get
anyways,
there?
I ended up breaking my foot playing basketball.
Okay.
And so I had to stop training, and I was actually like starting to really enjoy the community at least, and just the experience. So I sort of went down the YouTube rabbit hole of like martial arts techniques.
Oh.
And so it started out, I was like watching Aikido stuff, and then it just sort of like eventually led to Jiu-Jitsu.
Interesting.
Just through or not, maybe not immediately to Jiu-Jitsu, but sort of led to like the debate about which martial arts are more practical.
Yeah.
And so I learned about all that, and then it was about at the time that Ronda Rousey was like
crushing
at her
people.
peak.
Okay.
And then shortly after that was like dethroned by Holly Holm. But I remember that was like, I read an article about like Ronda Rousey, she's defeated this many opponents by armbar. And then I was like, well, what's an armbar? And I typed it in, and then Wikipedia says, well, an armbar is a type of submission. I was like, well, what's a submission?
Oh, no kidding.
And then I remember, and I looked up, I found this video like top 10 UFC submissions.
No.
And that video blew my mind. And that was really what introduced me to Jiu-Jitsu. And I remember seeing Anderson Silva triangle Chael Sonnen.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, you can strangle somebody with your legs from your back.
You had never seen the UFC prior to this.
I knew about it,
but it wasn't like,
I didn't like watch fights. In fact, I kind of bought into the idea that it was like kind of dumb and barbaric. And,
see, like, I think that me and my friends were watching like The Ultimate Fighter in like 10th grade and like getting gloves and duking it out in the backyard and like trying to learn. And then I remember getting my buddy in an armbar, but not even understanding. Like, in hindsight, I didn't know what the armbar was. I just knew what the position was. I didn't even know that the elbow was being hyperextended in that position. I just remember laying there, be like, you better tap out.
Well, you watched, you were into pro wrestling too.
I was really into
pro.
Dude, I was into pro wrestling. Yeah, it's kind of, and I watched a lot of...
Was there anybody who had, like, the armbar as their move? Or?
The Fujiwara armbar. There was, he was kind of an old school wrestler. A lot of the submissions in that, I feel
like you see a lot of toe holds.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Well, because like, professional wrestling came out of Catch's Cash Can, right? So some of that stuff does still hold over, but and we could talk, like, Chris Stone would... he would agree with me, but I think that he also likes the new product.
That's our coach.
Yeah, our coach is Chris Stone at Gig Harbor MMA, but
he's a real badass fighter who likes fake fighting.
Yeah, which is so odd. That's such an odd thing, but I think he loves wrestling more than watching fights. I would argue
he's actually friends with the pro wrestler Luchador Americana.
Oh yeah. The infamous Luchador Americana.
Anyway, can we get back to my story?
Yeah.
Like, I like talking about myself.
Sure, as we all do.
But anyway, so that was how I got into jiu-jitsu, and I remember after like a session or two, I was just hooked.
Sure.
But I would say, like you, my reasons for training have changed. And I think probably most people feel that way. I mean, I think there's sort of a cliche about like, and this is sort of why I wanted to make this the subject of our first podcast.
Sure.
There's a cliche about why people train. It's like, oh, well, some people train for self-defense, or some people train to get in shape, or I don't know. Is there a third
Some people
cliche
train.
reason?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I think both those are BS, though. To be
To
honest,
get in
like
shape, or what's the other one?
like self-defense.
You
There's
think that one's a BS one?
maybe not 100%.
I don't think it's. I think it might.
I think it brings people in, but it's not why people stay.
I agree. I can agree with that.
It's not why people stay. I think the reality is like a concealed carry permit is probably going to get you way farther than a blue belt, and is a lot easier to attain.
I don't. I don't think I agree with that.
Okay.
And
maybe we'll save that debate for another time.
But I want to have it now. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
But no, I don't know. I think like you were saying, like there's something addicting about jiu-jitsu. You meet a lot of great people.
Yeah.
You meet a few weirdos, and that would be a sort of a fun, another fun show for us to do.
Yeah. But that's kind of the thing with martial arts, right? It's like martial arts brings in, like, especially traditional martial arts. Like, even since doing jiu-jitsu, I went and did Japanese jiu-jitsu. I got my red belt in karate while training at Gig Harbor MMA.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I had missed, like, the traditional side. I missed the tradition. Like, I still love that. I started off in Taekwondo when I was a little kid. And like you were talking about Aikido, like, there's this certain affinity I still have for, like, the culture and the tradition of the, I don't know, the stuff that's absolute BS, Just kind of, I mean, it's kind of a bummer, but in those types of schools, it's like the same kind of people that would buy into no-touch knockouts. There's a certain amount of them, of willful ignorance, I think. Or maybe not. Maybe some people truly are true believers in it. But I think that, I don't know, there's just some serious characters that get into, like, the more traditional sides of it. Like some guys that do, kendo or whatever.
Well, there's a guy that we train with that comes to mind. I won't mention him.
Oh, for sure. No, I like that. I like that dude, though.
Yeah, me too. He's great. But yeah, I don't know. I think, like you mentioned, the community, that's part of it. But I think there's something deeper. And you tapped into it when you said it's like sort of as a man that you, like, if you were tested,
sure,
that you would want to be able to, like, prove yourself. But I think really, like, the training is that testing. Like,
yeah,
I think we like it because it's difficult, because it's a never-ending learning process, because, we like the sort of ups and downs of the journey of, like, the days where you just feel like a badass, and then, like, the days where you just feel like a dummy for you feel
like why am I wearing a purple belt?
Yeah. You're like, I just got my butt kicked by, like, a 220-pound white belt.
Yeah.
And it's like,
that's a tough moment.
Yeah.
I actually, so I have something, I want to hear your input on this for, like, why people enjoy it. I don't know if this is going to come across as odd, but there was this part of me that thinks that people get into it because, like, there's, like, an intimate human contact, right? There's nothing. Yeah. I don't think there's anything more intimate than grappling, right? Like, when you hug, if you were to hug someone or, like, hug a stranger.
Well, there's one thing I can think of, but we won't talk about.
Yeah. Well, clearly, okay. So this is number 2 then, right? But, there's this kind of the sentiment that we're becoming more and more disconnected as.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but, like, my family was always huggers growing up. But I noticed that sometimes, like, when I hug people, I'm like, oh, this person isn't comfortable or isn't used to this,
or
right?
they don't understand I have double underhooks.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
Dominating.
And I just dump them on their freaking head, dude. But I've thought that potentially it's the same way, like, playing baseball or soccer. It's like you're much more, like, physically, like, this is. I don't even know how to, like, articulate this in a way that's not going to sound bizarre, but I think you get closer to someone that you feel comfortable gripping onto them and being in these positions where your bodies are so close together and you're crushing the life out of them, that I think you are inherently going to build bonds around that.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. But I don't necessarily know why that is. Like, I can't.
Well, I mean, I think that grappling is like something that's pretty universal to any kind of like warrior culture.
Sure.
So I think the fact that like jiu-jitsu is maybe seen as strange by a lot of modern people is just related to the sense of like that we're sort of the exception, that like
Sure.
I mean, I guess you mentioned sports like baseball. We sort of have those kind of things in place
Yeah.
of, but for most of human history, like um, especially young men had grappling or sword fighting or something more
Sure.
combat related. I mean,
Sure.
really, all sports is a sort of a simulated combat. I just think that like combat sports are
What
more
those sports are
pure.
simulating,
Yeah, they're more pure in that sense. I
Yeah.
mean, like, you know, you don't really need any equipment to do jujitsu. Like, we could do jujitsu. You just need like ground that is relatively soft
Sure.
and flat. Um,
Someone was saying like, what's more exciting? What is there anything more exciting that could happen during someone's like during a soccer game than two guys just trying to punch the hell
yeah,
out of each
yeah,
other? And it's like, oh, like I think I'm just gonna start watching fighting
yeah, yeah,
instead.
yeah. I mean, and I don't know. Yeah, there's a purity to jujitsu where it's like we agree on a couple rules, or like, okay, we're not gonna punch or kick each other, but you know, and there's maybe a few other sort of agreed upon
Sure.
conventions, but for the most part, it's just like you and me making contact, and
Yep.
then the first person to give up loses.
Sure.
And there's a sort of beauty in that, I think.
I kind of want to go back to what you were saying about like this rabbit hole you jumped down, going like trying to learn more about martial arts and doing the YouTube
Mhm.
thing, finding jujitsu because you were looking for what, like a sense of security in case, right? Because this incident happens, and then
Yeah.
you're like, oh shoot, I need to learn how to fight.
Yeah.
Well, has for you has jujitsu given you that, or do you find that, especially as you progress in the art, to be like, I need to learn more stuff, I need to incorporate weapons training, I should probably start exploring striking more, or that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I've trained a little bit of striking. Trained with firearms.
Yep.
I would say I've developed an understanding about fighting and about violence that is, I think, a lot more realistic than what I had before. You know, I think I understand that it's like an inherently scary and chaotic
Sure.
situation. Uh,
Do you chalk that up to like, so okay, I know a person, I'm not going to be too specific, but this is like a stereotype um in jiu-jitsu and martial arts, but you know, the I see red guy.
mhm.
And if anyone, there's gonna be family members and stuff listening to this podcast that have no idea what some of the stuff we're talking about is, but
Mhm.
like the I see red guy is like the guy has no martial arts or no fight training, is might not even necessarily be particularly athletic, but he has this idea that like if he were to get into a fight, his mentality
Right.
would take over and he would be able to beat the other person,
Right.
which is which you can sympathize with until you train in combat sports. Then you're like, oh, you're just like totally
Right.
ignorant. Like you have no idea what it's
Yeah.
actually like when someone with their full strength grabs onto you and you're trying to do something that they're not allowing you to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the law of nature, you could say the stronger slash more aggressive guy is gonna end up on top and is gonna dominate the position, is gonna win the fight 9 times out of 10. And combat sports and jiu-jitsu especially kind of teaches you to like reverse nature,
Yeah.
in that sense, but it's hard work. And that's kind of what I meant about like having a more realistic understanding, is like I don't have any illusion that like if I got in a fight with like TJ Watt.
Yeah.
Who's like a Pro Bowl linebacker
Sure.
that like I would just like armbar him from guard or something like that.
But it might happen.
But yeah, I mean, you know, that knowledge and that the hours and hours on the mat, I think, can overcome like quite a big deficit in strength and even aggression to an extent.
Yeah, I think the weird thing about jiu-jitsu is that like I've had this realization recently, and with someone at our academy, but one of our larger guys, where I was already training when he came in, big dude, and you know, when I had more experience than him, I probably was 3 years ahead of him. I could kind of do what I wanted,
Yeah.
you know. But as he learned jujitsu, that size disparity became way more of a factor than before he knew anything, right?
Oh yeah.
And so that's the kind of the wake up call that I get from time to time, where it's
Yeah.
like, oh shoot, I'm still only 5'9", $170,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So it's like this guy might be a white belt or a blue belt, but and you know technically he doesn't have as much experience, but just the size disparity, you start to feel the reality of that as well.
Yeah.
And I think that you start to look at people, you start like before, again, like they talk about jujitsu being this thing that crushes your ego. Well, it does sometimes, but I feel like it's like a roller coaster in that, you know, you go in as a white belt, you get destroyed, you get emasculated because you're getting destroyed by people that are much smaller than you, or people that you perceive as being weaker,
or even women sometimes,
or even women.
God forbid.
Yeah, have mercy on our souls. And but then you start to get better, and you start to be kind of the predator out there, where you're like, I'm whooping up on people, and your ego gets inflated, right?
Yeah.
Like, then you're walking through the grocery store, and you're like, none of these people understand that I
could do.
Yeah, exactly. So that happens, and then all of a sudden you're a purple belt, and you're getting crushed by some white belt, super athletic white belt,
who's like really dedicated.
Yeah, totally. And actually, we'll give a shout out to Liam. But Liam was one of those guys for me, where I'm like, you know, he's like, yeah, I've been training for a while, and he got in there just totally athletic, understood the game, and he was a freaking problem when we would train. Yeah. And I remember walking away from that like, I'm gonna have to go full like competition as hard as I can if I'm gonna win these rounds, you know. And I don't necessarily like to roll like that in training, depending on who I'm with, but. But that was one of those moments where I'm like, okay, well, maybe not. Maybe there's someone in this grocery store who's really wildly athletic, and they're gonna put the boots to me.
Who's
you know?
a hockey player?
Yeah, or something, right? Yeah, he's like takes his 3 false teeth out before he fights me because he doesn't want to break him or something. But so then your ego like comes down again, but then you start to be able to deal with those guys, so it comes up again a little more, and then like. But that's kind of half the fun. That reminder of like, okay, I like stay humble.
Well, I think that's what I was getting at when I said like I think I have a more realistic understanding about fighting and violence, and yeah, I mean I think that gets into like what keeps me there is like this sort of constant problem solving and just sort of the never-ending depth of like seeing where your skills are lacking and just always having room to improve on your skills. And you know, different people, different training partners present different dilemmas and different problems for you to solve. And I just think like as men, we kind of need that, and especially as modern people, like who are sort of overly comfortable. I think that is really what draws us, and it's not necessarily related to like a fantasy scenario where you have to like take down some meth head, and although that could happen, you know, God forbid,
You say God for I fantasize.
I know, me
every
too.
day.
But it's also
I wanted,
it's a scary thought too, because
I wanted to be a Power
maybe-
Ranger so bad growing up.
maybe you're like totally dominating the situation, and then he makes a weird move, and then your head hits a fire hydrant,
or he bites you.
Yeah, then you have
and you're
AIDS.
like, yeah.
But
yeah.
I did choke him in the mouth.
Yeah, dude. I hope that Como 4 would show up so I could do this interview and like talk about all the techniques I pulled off on the guy.
Or Henry Gracie will reach out to you.
Yeah, dude.
To do an interview.
Then we could do an interview on his channel, and then our podcast would blow up.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, but okay. So going back, like when we, talking about why we started, there's kind of a similar thread there, right?
Yeah.
Like wanting to be able to handle yourself. But I'm totally with you that it got to this place of like now it's just this weird problem to solve, and there's what's that? It's a meme that's like been used ad nauseum, but it's Zach Galifianakis where like the numbers and stuff, like the math is going in front of his face where he's like trying to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And it's starting to turn into that where it's like, I'm like when you first started using octopus guard specifically, where I was like, okay, this is annoying. This is like, I like using this hip switch. I've used it for a long time and it's worked. And now it's not working.
Yeah.
So I need to find something that like, I need to make this adjustment here. It's so fun to like, even like those days where you get whooped up on, you're like, I'm going to YouTube the hell out of this because I need to know how to shut this down.
Well, it's another sort of cliche is like the jiu-jitsu is human chess.
Sure.
But I'm a decent amateur chess player and pretty analytical guy, and that's sort of jiu-jitsu sort of taps into that for me. But then at the same time, when you're in a hard round with somebody, it also like transcends, like it's a way for you to sort of get out of your mind and just like have to solve a problem in front of you with the tools that you have. That is just, I don't know, it's just unlike anything else. It's just such a thrill.
Yeah.
And it can be very incredibly frustrating at times, but then it's also like the most rewarding
there's this
thing I've ever done.
This is this kind of a weird, I was talking to again another one of our training partners, but there's this thing that I've been experiencing lately which has been really fun for me, where you have a tough round with someone and it feels like this back and forth, or it might feel like you're losing, like you're behind the 8 ball the whole round.
Yeah.
But then you talk to the guy and they're like, whether or not they're just being nice or not. But, well, for instance, if I talk about it from the perspective of the guy that felt like he was getting whooped up on, and then your training partner's like, man, you beat the hell out of me. And you're like, what? Like, it didn't feel that way. It felt like I was trying to play catch up the whole round, but they felt the same way.
Right.
Because it was just this, you're just exchanging and exchanging and exchanging.
Yeah, nobody has control of the situation.
Yeah. And but like when you don't have control, that's enough reason for you to feel like I'm losing.
Right.
But the other person feels the same way because you're offering different you're offering them problems that they're having to solve at the same time.
Yeah.
I find that to be so I'm like it gives me I just feel excitable talking about that kind of stuff, because that's one aspect to the game that I freaking love.
Yeah.
That feeling of like, oh, we're both, or I don't know if you've ever been in like those positions where like, I wonder if this guy's gonna, if I just tough this out for a second, he's gonna give up on it because he's gonna think that he doesn't have anything going, even though I'm in big trouble here. You know, that kind of sense. That's been really fun to kind of explore and recognize when I'm in those moments lately.
And that's a huge part of jiu-jitsu, is the ability to like stay calm through the fire, through the chaos that's inherent in a violent encounter with another person. But it's the biggest difference really, like between a skilled grappler and a novice, is that you can be calm in those like really intense situations, and like just I'll use the expression like eating pressure.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you just gotta like eat a hard crossface and just
Yeah. Like, this is nothing,
yeah.
dude. Yeah.
Right.
This is all I can
It's
take
sort
all
of like
day.
there's like a poker face
Yeah.
kind of element.
Oh,
to
big
that.
time.
There's another thing that you were hitting on earlier that I wanted to circle
Okay.
back to is like when you start to gain the ability to dominate
Sure.
other people and like the sort of roller coaster, the emotional roller coaster of jiu-jitsu in that sense. So like when you start out, like you were saying your first session, like you realize like another person can control you and it's like a terrible feeling.
Yeah.
You know, a humbling experience. Can be often people report like claustrophobia.
Sure.
Um and over time you get used to that, and then all of a sudden one day, you know, probably close to blue belt, then like the new people that come in the gym, they're like fresh meat to you. It's like, what
Yeah.
was the quote in Fight Club? He's like, when you first showed up you're like a piece of chewing gum, but
Yeah.
then after a couple months you're carved out of wood.
Yeah.
So it's like and then I think you have to learn a new lesson, which is like you have to learn about mercy.
Yeah.
Which, you know, as is a sort of central theme in Christianity too,
Sure.
which I think is very powerful. Because then you're like, well, now I have the power to like break this guy's arm,
Yeah.
or just break his spirit.
Yeah. Which is breaking the spirit's more fun sometimes.
Yeah, but you have to learn. It's like sometimes it's sort of the opposite of having the round where you're like, I couldn't do anything and that guy can do whatever he wants to me. Then when you have the round where it's like, I probably could have been more charitable
Sure.
in that role. And so now you like realize, well, now I've developed this ability to hurt people, and
Yeah.
now I need to like dial it back.
Dude, sometimes I don't know about you, but there's these times where I have a feeling of that oh man, this is going to make me sound so wimpy, but I wish that the other person was being like I get I get too charitable during certain rounds where I'm like, okay, I can tell that this guy is given 110%, and I am going, I'm trying to keep it at like that 70-75% pace,
Yeah.
and I never push it up to that 110 because it doesn't feel right for me to do that. But in the middle of the round, I'll realize like, okay, I'm kind of like paying for the fact that I'm taking my foot off the gas a little bit.
You feel they're taking advantage of your charity.
Yeah, which is so, and that I know that might make me sound like I'm trying to say.
No, I totally
yeah,
get
but like, because there's like, I'm under no illusion. There's plenty of dudes that can put the boots to me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But there are days where I'm like, like, if we're gonna have one of these rounds, we can have one of these rounds, but like, I'm not trying to give it to you, so I'm not sure why I can feel that you're giving it to me. Like, let's just work a little bit.
Yeah. You're like, oh, go ahead, pass my guard.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're like trying to like dig their elbow in your face.
Dude, yeah, exactly.
And like rip a kimura as
Oh.
hard as they can. Or
Yeah, or it's like you had their back. Okay, like, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining too much, right? You had their back and you're fighting for a choke, and you're being a good sport about it, right? You're not going across their gum line. You're not driving across their nose to get the opening. You're not putting your knuckle up underneath their septum and pulling it up to get access to the neck. And then 1 minute passes. Now they have your back, and all of a sudden you feel their finger in your mouth grinding across your teeth. And you're like, how the heck? Like, didn't he recognize that I was being pretty like I was trying to be a good training partner, and now like all of a sudden I'm getting fish hooked.
Right.
There's that aspect to
Yeah.
being charitable as well. But with that said, like, I don't have it in me to not be that person, and so sometimes I struggle with, okay, am I being too nice? Like, would this person benefit more from me actually being a little bit more grindy in this scenario versus, allowing them to kind of, I don't know, do their dirt when they get on top or they get into a dominant position. I don't have that in my heart. Like even
Yeah.
I can think of two instances in like tournaments, and one that when I got my gold, right, which was like really cool for me in this nogi, and I ended up doing I hip tossed this guy and land on top of him, and it was like with such force that like
Yeah, I've seen the video.
yeah. Was there a video? Well,
Maybe it was a different,
no.
different match.
Darian was there, and in my head, it was like the best judo throw ever to occur in
Yeah.
the history of jiu-jitsu. It probably looked sloppy as hell, but I felt all my weight land on his ribs, and I paused, and I gripped him while we are in side control, and I asked him, and this is like, was this? I hope he didn't think I was being like, I don't know, like trying
Flexing.
to flexing him, but like I stopped while I'm gripping. I was like, "Hey, are you okay?" And he said yes, and then we kept on going. And then same thing happened in my last tournament before I got promoted to purple belt, where I armbarred the guy, and it was like snatch armbar. Like I grabbed it and ripped pretty good because I wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
And when it was done, it was like I felt so concerned for the guy's for his physical well-being, and I felt almost apologetic that I had done it to him. But I don't think not everyone has that. Like, I don't think everyone has that disposition.
Yeah, maybe.
And maybe
I think you get a lot of that in jiu-jitsu compared to other combat sports.
Okay.
Where we don't ultimately really want to hurt people. For the most part, I mean, I can't speak for everybody. There's some psychos out there, I'm sure, but
sure.
Yeah, I think there's a I don't know, there's just a sort of a more friendly nature to jiu-jitsu where it's like really the goal is like that you can control somebody,
sure,
and that they have no choice but to tap, but I think most of us would rather not like send somebody to the hospital.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Whereas like, in striking sports, you don't really have a choice, but like the purpose of striking is to hurt somebody.
Sure.
I mean, I guess there's some element of control or whatever, but and that's something that attracted me to jiu-jitsu from the very beginning, was like the ability to like dial up the pressure to only what is necessary.
Yeah. Someone described that as like jiu-jitsu being the perfect martial art for your drunk uncle. Like you're at the family Christmas party and your drunk uncle's like acting crazy, and it's like, dude, you need to stop messing with people.
Yeah. And
then for whatever reason, he's like, well, let's go.
Yeah.
And then you can just kind of control him and then sit on your Uncle Billy's chest. You're like, dude, just
get off
chill
me.
Out. Yeah.
Get off me.
Yeah. So it's like there is that aspect to jiu-jitsu that no, I find appealing as well. And there's another training partner, and I want to be able to give this person credit, but the more we talk about this, like, I want to be able to ask our training partners if it's okay if we like talk about him specifically. But we were training, and I think it was like our second or third time rolling together, and it was at our old location, our old gym. So I had probably just started off at our current with our current group, because I was over at Gracie Baja for like a year, and he said, dude, you've got good jiu-jitsu, and you're really good from the bottom, but you need to be a little meaner. And it's a guy that's like really nice, and when we roll, even now, he's very, very charitable to me, like when we roll. And I remember him saying that, and it kind of like, I didn't know how to feel about it at first, like, because it's not something in my spirit to want to be like that, especially with people I didn't really know that well. But he said that to me, and I was like, okay, well, I'll start picking that up. And you start to realize that nobody's really no one takes it personally within a certain there's that spectrum,
threshold,
right? Yeah, there's a threat. That's the word I was looking for, not spectrum. Within that threshold of like, okay, now you can grind it out a little bit harder here, and like finding where that threshold and where that boundary is was really important. Like, honestly, that moment I would identify as one of the more important interactions I've had with anybody in my time doing jiu-jitsu, is the fact that he took me aside more or less after our round and had said that to me. Yeah, because I think it kind of changed the trajectory of how I started training going forward. Because when you're too charitable, you're also kind of like shooting yourself in the foot because you're not able to get the most out of your training.
Yeah.
Right? Like there is certainly that aspect to it. But yeah, I think that's um yeah, I mean that was such a significant. It was so poignant for me when he was saying that I think about it all the time, and I still struggle with that,
Me
right?
too.
I
Yeah.
do still struggle with
Yeah.
that, but it was
I think
very
it's better to struggle with that than the other. You don't want to be told that you're like a spaz and people are
yeah,
consider you a dangerous training
sure,
partner.
yeah, that'd be certainly
But I
less than
think
ideal.
I think you're getting at something that was like one of the major themes that I wanted to touch upon, which is that I was thinking about this when you're talking about like feeling that your training partners don't always reciprocate your level of mercy
Sure,
or charitableness. Is that grappling is really like this primal kind of a language, like, and there's a dialogue
yeah,
happening when we're grappling with one
sure,
another, and there's sort of all these like unspoken things that you have to work out. And sometimes it's maybe worth actually saying it, but really ultimately like you kind of have to let your grappling do the talking.
sure,
And I would say also there's a sort of a spiritual dynamic I think that's at play, that it's like you kind of learn about how you are supposed to fight, or it's like you were created with, or you were given a certain set of tools, a certain physicality, a certain level of analysis, a certain like personality that you bring to the table, and out of that, like you're not so much like learning moves that other people are teaching to you, which is part of it, but there's a deeper level where you're just like discovering the way that you fight,
sure,
like based on what you've been given by God, or like
sure.
what the gifts that you have. And and you learn about yourself, like, how am I going to be when I have power over somebody? That's
Sure.
kind of what I was getting at before with like with mercy and all these kind of things. Is like,
Yeah, I'm just a merciful, good guy.
you sound like such a self what's the word, self-appraising
Sure.
jerk.
Self-aggrandizing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's
But it's good. I mean, it's good to learn that about yourself, I guess.
sure. I mean,
To
but
learn that, like, when you have the power to hurt somebody,
sure.
that your tendency is to like stop before that line where it would be an abuse of that power.
Well, I think that this kind of point, and we're almost 40 minutes into this podcast, but the last 20 minutes, I do want to circle back around to a couple more questions, more in the lines of.
We're doing an hour.
Yeah, we do. We might as well. We might as well put an hour in. Just let's get. We're working out the kinks right now. There's gonna be 6 people that listen to this one, and as we get better, dude, it'll be good. But
7.
7. Yeah,
8.
yeah, maybe 12. Yeah. Here. So, but what you were just saying, right? It's like we sit here and we have these conversations that sound so kind of like not woo woo, but they're like spiritualized. And I think that these kind of sentiments were just. I think it's good to have these conversations as jiu-jitsu practitioners because they're not as explicit as they are in more traditional martial arts. Like, to circle back
Right.
around to that, one thing that it feels like is missing from like contemporary combat sports is the discussion of things like discipline well, discipline maybe not so much, but things like integrity and mercy and what it means to be benevolent and that sort of thing. Or that when you're going to karate, right? Like that's probably going to be that might be something the sensei starts off talking about, like those kind of spiritual lessons or these little tidbits of, hey, why are we here learning how to do this? Oh, it's to defend our loved ones and defend ourselves. It's not just this this meathead activity. And so I think
Yeah.
that I
And it's not
enjoy.
to like pick a fight
Yeah, no,
with somebody in a road rage incident so you
sure.
can twister them.
Yes, but if you do twister someone in a road rage incident and Como 4,
Hopefully somebody's recording.
yeah, dude, hopefully, and then Henry Gracie hits you up, has you on their channel, and your podcast blows up. But no, but I guess, and so the other side of anyway, so to circle back to in this last 15 minutes that we'll be talking, I guess, why did you pick jiu-jitsu? So you went down this rabbit hole, right? And one of the reasons that jiu-jitsu made sense to me was based on the profession that I was doing. And that's what a lot of the guys were doing, because when it came to trying to apprehend someone to put them in handcuffs, jiu-jitsu made the most sense. Take someone down, control them, and use either pain compliance or some type of manipulation of their limbs to affect an arrest, while also being able to take those same skills to kill a guy should you need to. Not to get too dark about it, but so I think that that's kind of what led me into jiu-jitsu, and then I ended up falling in love with it. But when you went down your research into some of these other arts, why did you end up landing on jiu-jitsu versus, like, I'm sure you came across things like kickboxing, or I don't know, you came across Muay Thai, you came across like just straight MMA. Yeah. But for some reason you were like, jiu-jitsu was the thing. Was it because it was something that was accessible where you were living, or was it something more than that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to think about a little bit how I would answer that, but yeah, I mean, it's a lot of things that we've talked about. Basically, once I started doing it, I was just so fascinated, and I realized like how deep the waters were and how much there was to learn, and it just sort of got a thrill out of like the intensity that you experience, which you can experience like the first week, whereas like hopefully if you're in a kickboxing gym, you're not feeling like you're fighting for your life in the first week. And and I've done a little bit of striking, and I learned quickly that I do not like to get hit hard.
Sure. I get that.
I like kicking a bag.
Yeah, no, I get that.
As although as Bruce Lee said, bags don't hit back.
Yeah, sure.
To misquote the legend.
Yeah, but they don't hit back because I hit them once and they don't want to fight anymore.
Exactly. You just hit him with a kill shot.
Hit him with that ki.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like at the beginning, I just sort of saw, once I sort of started to learn more, I saw jiu-jitsu as like a part of mixed martial arts. But then over time, like, it just sort of becomes this game. Like, a lot of what I do is not really something that a person should do in a fight.
Sure.
But it's part of, I guess, the art of controlling a person and of, like, countering that aggression, fighting from what would be seen as a position of weakness and like using it to your advantage.
I think that like when I was a blue belt, my emphasis was much more on stuff that would serve me in some type of violent altercation out in the streets, dude. And towards the tail end of blue belt, I was like, okay, but now I need to learn how to deal with other jiu-jitsu people.
Yeah.
So, which is different, right?
Because totally different.
It's completely different thing. So, because when you are a tough, like, competitive blue belt, you have enough skill set there that you're going to be a pretty formidable person to deal with by some random thug that wants to mug you or pick a fight, right? Yeah. Not that you should necessarily get into that fight, but...
Yeah. But you experience that when you get the guy in his trial class who's a lot bigger and stronger than you.
Sure.
And just, like, way overcommits his weight and is just like super easy to sweep.
Yeah.
Super easy. Like he just gives up as soon as you mount him. He gives up his back.
Sure.
And you just sort of see like just how easy it is. Basically, like when somebody doesn't really know.
Or you have that moment where you have them controlled and you hear how intense their breathing is.
Yeah.
And yours is like, oh, dude, I'm barely breaking a sweat. You have, oh, you're in for hell right now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And then the round ends and you're like, hey, good roll. And then you're like looking for the next person to roll and they're like, I need to go sit against the wall and reassess my life.
Yeah, and you pat yourself on the back just a little bit. No, I think that's, yeah, so, yeah, but that's also the beauty of it, right? Because, okay, now you've gotten past, okay, again, bring it back why you trained to begin with. But once you learn all these things, like, okay, I feel like I have the self-defense-ish, which is kind of a, self-defense is kind of it's an interesting term, right?
Yeah.
That's another separate conversation, but we'll use it just for the sake of what people know what that term generally means. But once you get past that, it's like you unlock this next. It's like a separate journey, right? Like, okay, this was my main campaign in a video game, and I've completed it, and now the next campaign is literally learning how to beat other jiu-jitsu guys, and then you realize, like, the things I have to use are not the stuff that's going to work on a guy that, like, the stuff that works on people that don't train, it's not necessarily going to work on other guys. And I know, I've been cracking jokes at training with you lately because you've been hitting me with barambolos over and over again, and it's starting to be very frustrating. And you wouldn't train, like, you wouldn't go teach a room full of cops the barambolo.
No.
But it's super useful if you're grappling a guy who knows jiu-jitsu, because it's one of those, like, tricky things that, he might put himself in this position because he knows jiu-jitsu. And then you can take advantage of that. And I feel like that's another aspect of what keeps me training, is that, like, okay, because I also know, shout out to Gary Drake. He's like this guy that runs Raider Tactical, and he was kind of the first person that got me into combatives at the police academy. He was an instructor there, and he got his purple belt from Marcelo Alonso. And as far as I understand, he doesn't train jiu-jitsu anymore, but he does, like, I took a class with him. It's like a lot more like street survival, and dude, they're teaching like arm drags and very fundamental wrestling and all this kind of stuff. He took
using an underhook to get up off the bottom.
Yeah, he took jiu-jitsu as far as he felt that he needed to take it for his purposes, right? He's like a executive protection guy, and trains private security and all this kind of stuff, right? So he took, and I would have to ask him about this. He'd be kind of a fascinating person to talk to. Maybe he'd be on the podcast at some point. But my sense is that he took what he knew was useful for his purposes, and he was like, okay, if I go any further, it's just going to be about what's going to make me better at fighting other jiu-jitsu guys, And so he stepped away and he started pursuing other things. Whereas for me,
I guess that doesn't interest some people.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, he did this Hungar Kung Fu class, and he was talking about this stuff that he had gotten from that class, and I just found that to be so interesting, because he's one of the most, like, badass dudes I've ever met. And because that's a different journey, right? He got his purple belt, and he was like, okay, which is not me at all. Like, I got my purple belt, and I never thought I'd get my purple belt, and now all I can, like, I don't necessarily think about the next belt, but I know that I'm going to get my black belt just because I've totally fallen in love with the art,
right?
And it's not. And as much as I love our academy, if our academy were to disappear tomorrow, I would find another place to go train the same art with a different group of guys. I think that's kind of a fascinating part of the journey, what keeps people around.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I totally relate to that. Like, when I started out, I was like, well, if I just get a blue belt or maybe a purple, that sort of seemed like such a dream.
Sure.
Then, I would be able to handle myself in like 99% of, one-on-one, no weapon altercations.
Sure.
But then, you just sort of get sucked into the game of jiu-jitsu, and some people sort of slag on that. Like, sort of you're losing the point. But I don't know, they just don't get it. They don't, like, it's way more fascinating for me to, like, figure out how to, like, negate, like, your very good pressure passing than it is, like, how to strangle, like, the 220-pound white belt.
Sure.
It's like that's relatively simple. So I mean, for me personally, it appeals to like my chest brain
Sure.
and my problem solving, and it's gone way beyond like handling myself in a fight.
Yeah, and this is like,
and I think that's good.
Sure. I trained in another
to counter the critics
martial arts academy that is local, and I was training there for a number of months, and it got to a point like we were drilling the same stuff, and I was like, okay, every day we're gonna drill these things, and I started to realize that what made it different, and I was already trained jiu-jitsu at the time, but so I was doing both. At this other academy, it was a different martial art, but they were really training how to defeat someone that wasn't training, right? So it was like, hey, these are the most common 5 attacks, like this overhand right, this shirt grab,
the tackle,
the
football
push,
tackle,
the football tackle, the push, the that kind of stuff. And here's how
the shirt grab,
dude, no, serious, but like all that kind of stuff. And here's how you would negate that. And so they drilled those 6 different things ad nauseum because they were so statistically probable to occur in a street encounter. And I can't remember necessarily where I was going with that, but I just found that to be kind of an interesting juxtaposition, versus choosing to go down the infinite well of jiu-jitsu and problem solving, not just the most common things, but super niche positions, right? Yeah. Like I find that to be another incredibly fun aspect of jiu-jitsu. So we have 5 minutes left before we hit our hour mark. So is there anything that you would want to say to kind of like close this out? How do you think the podcast went? I guess is a good question.
Well, like I said at the beginning, like we love talking about jiu-jitsu. For anybody listening, you'll forgive us if it's a bit rambly, but yeah, man, I think to answer the original question, like why we train, it's a lot of reasons, and a lot of them are sort of not like the cliche, but it's sort of getting at something that's maybe sort of hard to put your finger on, and it's you don't really know unless you know, I guess. So, I would say to anybody who wants to train and is like, oh, let me get in shape first, or this or that or the other, like you just got to show up and come and see. And if it's meant for you, like you'll just know, and you'll just get hooked, and you just like learn about how you can move, learn about like what you're capable of, learn how tough or not tough you are, and hopefully like be able to do it your whole life.
Yeah, because there's I guess the final point, there's 2 kinds of people that come into this art. And there's the people that get there, get stomped out, and realize they want no more part of that, and they don't like that feeling. And then there's the other people that are like, I think I want to start putting boots to people. Like, I want to learn how to do this. I want to be on the other end of it. And then they're willing to put in that work and all that time in order to get there.
Yeah.
And I guess I just feel fortunate that, I was the latter, because,
and that you didn't get injured.
Sure,
and that you, just your life circumstances allowed you to continue to train.
Yep. So anyway, thanks for listening to our first podcast, the first Grappler's Dilemma podcast, episode 1. I think we're gonna keep at it and see what we can get going with this. In the show notes, I'm gonna put an email, so you guys, and maybe some Instagram, so you guys can get in touch with us and ask any questions you may have, or any type of topic that you'd want us to address in later episodes. It's kind of a fun deal. And if you are in the Gig Harbor area of Washington State, you should drop in to Gig Harbor MMA and come get some rounds in. And maybe Chris Stone can give us discounts on our tuition if we get enough people coming in. Just kidding. Anyway, thank you guys for listening, and keep an eye out for the next one.
Osu.